Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and good morning for those of you on the West Coast, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Is Social Media Worth Multi-Million-Dollar Investment? Using Social Listening to Determine the ROI of Social Media. My name is Todd Grossman. I am the CEO of Americas for TalkWalker, a social data intelligence company, and I am going to be your host for today's webinar, organized in collaboration with Social Media Today. I am joined by Neil Schaefer, Ben Kay, and Kim Celestre, and today we're going to discuss social media ROI. Just a few bits of housekeeping. The webinar will be recorded, and slides will be emailed to all registrants. You can ask questions at any time using the GoToWebinar question box, and follow along and share your thoughts using hashtag SMTLive on Twitter. At this point, I'd like to quickly introduce myself and my fellow panelists. Neil is a recognized leader in the world of business social media. He's a global speaker, university educator, and consultant on social media strategy. He's also been chosen as a Forbes Top 50 Social Media Power Influencer for 2 years running. We're very pleased to have him on board today. Kim is a former Forrester analyst and current Senior Director of Product Marketing at Jive Software. She has over 20 years of experience as a marketing practitioner and is well-established thought leader in online communities and social marketing with numerous awards to her name. Thank you for joining us, Kim. And Ben has worked across the telecoms industries for over 15 years across a range of disciplines. He's now Senior Managing Consultant at IBM's Social Consulting Division, and he most recently led the strategic use of digital technology at one of the UK's biggest telecommunication companies. And finally, me. I've been working in the world of PR and measurement for many years, and earlier this year I became the CEO of Americas at TalkWalker, handling the company's expansions into the Americas region. For those of you unfamiliar with TalkWalker, it's an all-in-one social intelligence platform that provides clients from around the world with in-depth social insights they can act on using powerful but easy-to-use social listening technology. For more information, you can always visit talkwalker.com. Together, we're going to be discussing the question of social media ROI. With companies of all sizes and in most industries active on social networks, it's becoming increasingly important for social media teams and marketing managers to prove that social media is worth the investment. Global companies in particular who operate multiple social accounts on each network need to be able to prove that the time and resources spent on social media are actually making a difference to the bottom line. Neil will kick us off by explaining the general trends and challenges in this industry. Ben and Kay will then draw on their extensive experience to give us some concrete examples of exactly how social ROI can be measured and why it's important. We'll then have some Q&A so our expert panel can answer your questions. And again, if you want to spread the discussion on social media or ask questions through Twitter, join the discussion using the hashtag SMTLive. So let's get started. First off to Neil.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Todd, and thank you as well to TalkWalker and Social Media Today for the invitation to speak here. So let's set the stage for the conversation that we're going to have for the next hour. What you see here really is the problem being that companies are spending more and more on social media. What you see here on the top is a graph put out by the CMO survey. It comes out annually. Duke University School of Business together with other institutes do this annual survey. And what we see here is the percent of marketing budget that's currently being spent on social media is 10.7%. All the CMOs know that's only going to be increasing as they increase their investment in social media. In the next 12 months, we see that number going up to 14%. In 5 years, nearly a quarter of marketing budgets will be in social media. That's an incredible amount of money that's being poured into social media. But at the same time, here's one data point for you on the bottom. 88% of marketers want to know how to measure social ROI. Now, this comes from Michael Stelzner, Social Media Examiner's annual Social Media Marketing Industry Report. So at some point, obviously the question of social media ROI is going to come up. It's already been coming up for years now, but as spending increases, it's only going to become a bigger problem and a bigger need to measure. Next slide, please. So the funny thing is, though, I talk to clients that say, well, how do you measure all this when they never measured their traditional marketing activities? It was just an assumed cost. Before social media, early on in my career, I actually had an offer from a large consumer products company, and I was going to be in charge of marketing this product that you see right here in Japan. And what I realized then, which a lot of consumer marketing groups do, is they basically invest in focus groups. I was basically told that focus groups was going to be the way that we try to figure out what product to make, how to promote it, and what have you. So an incredible amount of money being spent on focus groups for marketing, and I don't know if the ROI of that was ever questioned, but if you think about it, social media has become that ultimate focus group if you listen. And obviously more and more companies are listening because we know that it's an infinite source of data regarding consumer demographics and buying trends. We can gauge consumer interest, how they interact with competitors with our content or with our competitors' content. It can help also measure, obviously, aggregate interaction between a brand and the public. And as more and more of us become more and more active on social media and share more and more content, it only becomes that much more valuable to listen in social media. But it obviously complicates things because there are just more social media messages out there than there are human beings, and we know that big social data is only increasing exponentially. Next slide, please. So savvy large enterprises are not just using listening for marketing either, and this also further complicates how we go about measuring this. Because if you think about it, ideally, social data should be used throughout the enterprise. Obviously, public relations, maybe where listening and social media monitoring began. And if I go around the circle here clockwise, starting with public relations, we all know that many companies are starting to have real-time listening channels, real-time customer support channels, especially on Twitter, but also on Facebook and other social networks. Marketing is a no-brainer. Sales, social selling, human resources for a variety of reasons. Even savvy consumer brands have listening outposts for R&D purposes to try to gauge what consumer trends are so that they can tweak current products or develop new products just based on being able to tap into public conversations and what are on people's minds because they're actually talking about that in social media. Next slide, please. So really, this is becoming business intelligence. A website becomes an infrastructure so you have an outpost on the internet, and social listening becomes this business intelligence. Now, I know, Todd, you're obviously moderating this conversation, but I found a great quote of yours I wanted to share. To prove the true value of all this, it's critical to build metrics based on data that the C-suite can easily digest and clearly map back to true business goals and objectives. As Brian Solis always says, the C-suite speaks the language of Excel and PowerPoint. So it comes back to that data. But what's amazing here is if we take all that business intelligence, we divide it out to what we can glean from social listening. I just created a partial list here with bullet trends. I talked about those marketing trends, what the media is saying about you, what your competitors are saying and what is said about them, what your customers are saying about you and what they are saying to you, who your potential customers might be and what they are saying, who your advocates are. Social provides a new way to find both potential customers as well as who your advocates are and what they are saying about you. What is their perception of your brand? Who are influencers in social media? Well, without listening, you're never going to know. And what are they talking about? What are your employees saying online? And what are they saying about you? And in fact, I talked about human resources. Where are the potential candidates that you might be able to fill by building a talent pipeline by creating relationships over social media? So on the right-hand side there, on the left-hand side, you see all the different types of business intelligence you can glean. On the right-hand side, it's time now to rationalize all these things and have every department that already has their own KPIs for operating now include all these things as part of what they do. So we're not creating necessarily new KPIs for social media. We're aligning what we've always done in our business and complementing what we do with what we can glean from social media and making it part of our corporate infrastructure. As I like to say, social media replaces nothing, complements everything, and I think that this is a perfect example of that. Next slide, please. So I want to end, and obviously there's a lot of people talking. I don't want to hog everyone's time, so I'm going to try to make this very short. I want to end with two very, very specific examples of some ways we can use social listening to measure the ROI of what we do in marketing. Now, the first one is a very, very interesting one, and both examples are going to come from the Talkwalker blog, which has a lot of great examples. But this comes down to the ROI of sponsorship spend. So major brands sign agreements with major sports stadiums in order to sponsor them to get their name on them, and they spend a certain amount of money to do that. Now, obviously, we know that different stadiums have different capacities, but in this world of social media, that's a given, right? In the world of social media, we want to know above and beyond that what conversations are generated on social media about our sponsorship of that stadium. You know, how many mentions are there of our name in social media? And this is an example of how you can actually do an analysis of how many mentions are there, what was the cost per mention for the examined venue, and you get a very, very different look at what that can be. So one way of looking at it, and you know, sponsorship spend is huge in the United States. This is an additional metric that you can add to what you've already been doing to see what additional boost you can get from that investment in social media. And you need obviously be doing social listening in order to get this data. Next, please, Todd. And finally, this is another example. This is a very, very common thing that marketers are doing, is they're trying to find correlations between bumps in mentions or some type of bump in social activity with a correlation of additional website visits, additional revenues. This is a pretty clear example from YoPlay of two different campaigns that they did, and we can see when they did the campaigns, not only was there a slight boost in online mentions from the campaign, the second campaign got a bigger boost, but you also see that it added in increasing the revenues, especially on that second campaign. So obviously when brands are doing campaigns, there is a traditional media component, there's a digital component, there's a social component, and by mixing these up and looking at these correlations over time, you know, through that data, you're going to get a better idea as to that investment in social, how much is it actually complementing all those other efforts you are doing, or generating a specific social-only campaign and seeing if that has any results and what those results are as well. So by integrating social data with sales data, this is another way that marketers can understand social's potential role in increased revenues. I know we have a lot more great case studies coming up, so Todd, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Neil, thank you so much. There were some great points there that really resonated. 88% of marketers want to know how to measure ROI in 5 years' time, and that, of course, social media is the ultimate focus group and complements everything. I really liked how you were able to demonstrate as well how you can integrate sales data with social data to get some meaningful insight there. Thank you very much, and we'll save some specific questions on till the end. I see some coming in already. Our next speaker is going to be Kim.
All right, well, thank you. Hi, everyone. So back in 2009, I worked at Sun Microsystems. This was before the Oracle acquisition, and I had led a small marketing team, and our name was Emerging Marketing. So we were testing and piloting emerging tactics, and one of them obviously was social media. So back in 2009, I was the first employee at Sun to launch a listening platform. And this was pretty unique situation because we launched it very specifically for a product launch. We wanted to monitor the discussions that were taking place in the developer community. This is for a Java product, a new Java product. And we wanted to get a sense of what the conversations were, what was the sentiment, and we tracked that over time, starting with beta, moving into the second beta of the product, the launch, and then post-launch. And we even tracked it based on the updates to the platform. And looking back at that time, it seemed like so long ago, but the technology itself was fairly clunky. We had to do a lot of manual reviews of the data that was coming in. I actually had to go hire an intern to just kind of mine through everything. But at the end of the day, it was very impactful because we were using listening tools to basically track conversations, bring those insights back into our research and development team, and actually shape the next phase of the product. So that was my earliest exposure, right, to listening. And if we fast forward to today, I mean, so much has changed, right? I mean, think of all the data that is out there right now. There's 500 million tweets per day. 1.7 billion people who have active social accounts, right? It's just mind-boggling and overwhelming for many marketers. Now, if you couple that with the spending, and Neil talked a bit about this earlier, but when you talk about where we're headed, as far as spending on social media, we know in the U.S. only we're going to surpass $7 billion, right, of spending in social by 2019. If you broaden that to digital marketing, we're going to surpass 100 billion in spending by 2019. So there's a lot of money going into digital and social. But marketers have still failed to master social data and what to do with this data. How do we analyze it? How do we turn it into meaningful insights that will help drive change within the organization? So some of the challenges that we've seen marketers face, and I actually did quite a bit of research on this back at my four years at Forrester, and speaking to many marketers and tech vendors that were in this space. These are some of the challenges that popped up. One was that marketers are having trouble trying to set the right goals for social. They tend to track data instead of actually measuring the impact of that. And I think this is a big challenge when it comes to having the right skill sets within the organization that knows what to do with the data. They take a tactical approach. And when I say tactical approach, it means diving right into the data, not stepping back and really defining what that strategy is, both in the short term and long term. They tend to analyze in a silo. So what I mean by that is taking social data in through listening and monitoring, only looking at it from the perspective of how it impacts their social strategy. Well, the true value, right, of social data is how it impacts even non-social social functions, and Neil showed that before, and even non-marketing, right? So as I mentioned, back in my Sun Microsystems days, with my first experience with social listening, we usually use that data to drive into our product development function. So the true value is really kind of taking that more holistic approach. And then finally, struggling to connect that social data and insights with business outcomes, right? How is that process of analyzing and converting it into insights actually at the end of the day helping a company make money or save money, right? If we really want to get it down to those two main business outcomes that most businesses focus on. Next slide, please. So what it really comes down to, if we really want to start thinking about, how do we take a more strategic approach to taking social data, converting it into social intelligence, you really have to understand the full customer journey, right, and how social intelligence will impact the entire life cycle, customer life cycle. So let's start with discover, right? So if you're a brand and you're out listening to conversations that are taking place on social networks, you really want to drive those conversations back to a branded web page or site, right, where you can then provide more deeper conversations or connections with people or content, right, that's going to help those individuals inform a purchase, right? Once they become customers, it's all about that asking and sharing best practices or experiences, right, and capturing those conversations again on those social channels and feeding them in, right, into that post-purchase customer lifecycle stage. Then, very important, because I do think this is a huge trend that we're seeing when it comes to social data intelligence, is understanding, who are your brand advocates, right? What are they talking about? What is the overall brand sentiment, and how do you take those conversations and again bring them back in, right? So you can continue to activate those advocates. So again, they could spread your brand messages out on social channels, which will start this whole cycle over again, right? So I think it's really important to think about, how social data can be converted into intelligence, right? That's going to drive all of these stages of the customer journey. So let's go to the next slide. I wanted to talk about Lululemon for a few minutes here, and I know this is a very well talked about use case, and we all know the debacle around the yoga pants, and then there were a few missteps that the company took in response to that, right? And so they failed to respond in a relevant way. We saw that the stock tanked, and then the CEO Christine Day had left. So I think we all understand what had happened, based on the unfortunate incident, brand's worst nightmare, right, of having a serious flaw in the product. But what I wanted to talk about really is, so where are they now, right? What is Lululemon doing now, right, that has really helped advance how they're using social and how they are taking a more holistic perspective based on that customer journey. So as you can see here, this is basically a screenshot of Lululemon's co-creation or ideation site, right? And I strongly suggest you check this out because I think this is a great example of how a brand is combining that social data with conversations that are occurring on their own community and using those conversations again to drive innovation, right, in their products. So this is interesting because going back to my earlier example when I was at Sun and when we went out and monitored conversations for a very specific product launch, at very specific points in time, right, fast forward to today when we look at Lululemon as an interesting use case, you could see that they are doing the same, but instead listening to conversations and then drawing them into their online community. So let's go to the next slide. So as you can see here, this is diving in a bit into the conversation. So there's just countless conversations and posts from both customers and brand advocates, and I'll get to the advocate side in a minute. But all of this is all about exchanging ideas on product, right? Exchanging their experiences, right? Going back to that customer journey slide that I showed earlier, when you think about that post-purchase stage where individuals are using the product and they're asking questions about the product, well, those are the two customer journey stages that Lululemon's really focusing on, right? And many of these conversations also occur on their social channels, right? Lululemon has a very strong Facebook presence. If you go to their Twitter page, you'll see quite a few customers posting pictures and talking about the product, asking questions. And so what Lululemon has done is by monitoring and listening to those conversations, bringing them back to their branded site where they could have those deeper conversations about individuals' experiences with the products, gathering that feedback, and then feeding that into their own product development processes to continue to improve on the product, right? And in turn, what they are doing is activating a very significant ecosystem of brand advocates. I mean, if there's one thing about Lululemon, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with their products, but people love their products, right? I know some women, that's all they wear when they work out. So there's this very thriving, passionate group of advocates. So through this cycle, right, of understanding who the advocates are and what they're saying on those social channels, bringing them back into the branded site, having those conversations with customers, and then taking a lot of those messages again and going back out and sharing those messages on social sites. And Lululemon has effectively pulled social data in to activate and drive their customers through that journey. And so I think this is a great example of really stepping back and taking that holistic approach of taking that social data and basically using that social data to drive that journey. Next slide, please. So what can we learn from this, right? And again, I think this is a rapidly, I still think that social is evolving at a fairly fast pace, especially as the volume of social content increases. And as I showed you before, I mean, there's just so much conversations and posts taking place. It's hard to really comprehend, right? So I think what we're really going to start seeing here is that, if anything, a more faster, agile approach, right, to taking that social data in and using that, right, to drive change within an organization and to also drive customer engagement. So positive ROI, when you think about, getting a positive return on investment, from social and listening and gathering that social data, I mean, really at the end of the day, it can only be achieved through action. It's one thing to grab data from all these different sources, but if you don't act on it, and if you don't use it to drive change in the organization or your product, that's a huge lost opportunity, right? And basically at the end of the day, you just have a bunch of data, right? It's like, if you want to make a meal and you go out and you buy the ingredients and you don't do anything with them, they're just sitting on the table, right? You really have to put this all together and use this to actually drive a business outcome. So first, having timely responses will improve brand sentiment. Responses are key, right? If you don't respond, then you're missing a major point of social, right? It's that two-way interaction. Secondly, that two-way interaction is only going to increase customer loyalty, right? If you're responding and you're interacting and you're pulling people right into your branded web properties and having deeper conversations, that will drive customer loyalty. If you are open and transparent, right, and allowing your customers to provide ideas and share their experiences, that will grow brand advocacy, right? So it's taking those conversations about your product and bringing them into the organization and actually taking an action by improving your product or even your brand messages or your operations. There's so many different ways that you could actually implement those ideas. And again, that's going to help drive long-term advocacy. And then last but not least, sharing those insights, right? So we talked about the challenge of taking data and only using it for one specific function in the organization. Share it across the organization. That's going to drive brand excellence from a holistic perspective. It goes beyond just using social data to drive social strategy, right? There's just so much opportunity if you take that cross-functional approach to what you're using social data for and driving that change. And with that, I will pass it back over to Todd.
Kim, thank you so much. I couldn't agree more in terms of how things are evolving today, and that it is completely mind-boggling with all of the information out there, and there's only so many hours in the day. When you talk about taking social data and converting it to social data intelligence, that's exactly it. It's all about getting an intelligent insight and being able to use that conversation data and drive that innovation. Thank you very much. At this point, we have Ben, who is going to clean up here.
Thank you, Todd. And good afternoon, good evening from my side of the Atlantic. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes giving a few examples where I see that social listening has really added value, business value, to some of the clients that I've had the opportunity to work with here at IBM. Before I get onto those specific examples, I'd like to, on the next slide, just share with you a similar viewpoint to the one that Neil put up earlier, that actually social data goes way beyond just marketing activity. And I kind of coined this phrase that if we can really tap into this social data and produce social insights, we have the opportunity to act much smarter and act much faster. As Neil said earlier, this is not about replacing all your existing research or focus groups or any of the other insight channels that you've got, but merely about complementing it. So looking across the bottom of this chart here, you see that there are a range of opportunities across the organization to really start to tap into this social data and start to take and derive good, meaningful insights from it in order to drive a particular business value. Now, for the marketers amongst you, you'll see some very traditional items along the bottom here: campaign optimization and media spend, tracking your consumer behavior, tracking competitor activity. Where it gets really exciting for me is where you start to look at things like managing crises, technology planning, and I'll come back to that particular example in a minute, predicting churn, so when your customers are more likely to leave you based on what they're talking about in social platforms. And I'm not just talking about complaints in social platforms directed at a brand. actually when you start to look at that conversation that they're having with you and other brands, you can start to see what opportunities there are to really take this data to complement existing data models that you've got within the organization. So if I go on to my first of my 3 examples. So next slide, please. So this one comes from a major mobile operator here in the UK who suffered a fairly major network cell phone outage in recent times. Now, what was really interesting that we saw from the social data is we actually saw that the issues with the network started to appear in social platforms before any other internal data source, to the tune of about 2 hours. So we could spot network issues happening and network degrading before technical teams, before customer service teams, before literally anybody else could spot this. Now, if we can tap into this data in a timely fashion, as Kim said before, we can start to use that insight to drive engagement strategies, to drive resolution, and ultimately reduce our cost to serve. Now, in this particular example, what was really interesting was we could spot the locations that the key issues were appearing at. We could actually define which customers were affected, whether they were corporate customers, whether they were consumer customers, and again, how severe those particular customers were having issues. Now, that's all great during the incident and managing the crisis. As you know, if a mobile operator doesn't have its mobile network, it pretty much doesn't have an awful lot out. So managing that crisis is absolutely critical. But you can't just use social data in isolation. Actually, what we did in conjunction with this client was take contact center data, network data, website data, and other external data sources. Google, for example, in this particular case, this particular customer searches for key terms around this particular brand exploded to the tune of about 10 times during this network outage. So again, we could start to track all of these different data sources and bring them together into meaningful insights. Now that's great for managing the crisis in itself, but then how do you measure the value off the back of it? Well, in this particular piece, we could track the impact on brand perception. We could actually see that there were big differences between where we believed or where the client believed as a network the issues were and where customers thought the issues were. And actually, from a financial point of view, and there is a business case associated with this, by understanding all the data during the crisis and taking that data and making decisions off the back of it quicker, acting smarter and acting faster, they were able to reduce their cost to serve during this time by a fairly significant amount. So the benefit in this particular client didn't come from marketing, didn't come from the traditional kind of avenues, but came from a pure cost to serve perspective. So I'm going to move on to my second example. So at IBM, we're very privileged to work with the All England Tennis Club, and we sponsor the Wimbledon event and have done here in the UK for many, many years now. For the last few years, we've run a social command center on site before, during, and after the Wimbledon Championship. Now, what you see here is one of the dashboards we put together for the Wimbledon Club. Excuse me. What this enabled us to do was to tap into all the conversation that was happening across the world and start to make some interesting decisions off the back of this. What it allowed us to do was drive a content strategy. A content strategy based on who was talking about what, and in this particular example, Novak Djokovic, I believe, there was a lot of conversation about his clothing. That was great for the marketing team at Wimbledon, who were able to take this data, take this insight, and generate content off the back of it. Excuse me. Now, what I think is really interesting about Wimbledon was also what we were able to do was not just from a social perspective, but track the volume of social conversation and actually start to provision IT resources off the back of this. Now, the reason I say that, at IBM, we also host the Wimbledon website, wimbledon.com. So tracking social data, we were able to provision extra space on those servers based on the amount of conversation happening in social and predicting the amount of traffic we'd get back to the website. Next slide, please. My last example is actually to turn things on its head slightly. So in these conversations, we always talk about external social. In this particular example, I want to talk about internal social. So the rise of internal social networks is huge. Let me introduce you to Max Black. So Max is one of our employees in our New York office. And Max took an Uber ride late last year, I think it was. And it was an Uber pool ride, in fact. Put his expense claim in and it got rejected. Now Max actually decided to post to our internal social network that he felt this was unfair. And that actually he was saving the company money by using this Uber pool service. And our corporate expense policy had actually said he couldn't use a lift sharing service and that we wouldn't reimburse him for it. So Max actually raised an internal petition on our internal social network to kind of petition against this particular issue. Now that was really interesting because we were listening, because we listen as an organization, certain key words started to pop up. They were words like New York, Uber, taxi, and expenses. That started to flag up into our head office in New York. And actually on the next slide, thank you. Diane Gerson, who's one of our chief HR officers at IBM, picked up on this particular post and responded directly to Max and to all the people who had signed the petition. Now, Diane was very open and thanked Max for raising this, and actually was really, really proud of the fact that as an organization, we've created a social culture where employees are absolutely empowered to share their thoughts, share their ideas, and raise issues with the organization. Now, off the back of this, Diane committed to looking into what the issue was and why we had refused this particular expense claim. And as a result, overnight, this policy was changed. So it's now corporate policy that absolutely we can expense these Uber pool rides. So why do I tell you this story? Two reasons. Firstly, listening to what your employees say is as important as listening to what your customers are saying. And whether your employees are talking on an internal social network or an external social network, they're often forgotten, but actually really critical to a business success. The other reason I share this story with you is actually, and if we move on to the next slide, this story got picked up by a number of online media and journalists. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And actually, from a brand perception point of view, we started that right at the front of this call with Neil talking about brand perception. Actually, from us having what seemed like an out-of-date policy, by us listening to our employees and acting in an agile way, we're actually taking this insight, making change, and as a result, we've got a lot of positive response out of the back of it. So with that, I'll close my session and hand it back to Todd.
Wow, that was a great last story, and how policy was turned around in within 24 hours in an organization as big as IBM. Very impressive in the power of social business and social listening. Thank you, Ben. That was really great. At this time, we are taking questions, and you have the opportunity to use the GoToWebinar question box, or you can state a question on the hashtag SMT Live if you want. And I'm going to start off with the first question for all the panelists here. What are your thoughts on social dashboards for listening? And why don't we start with Neil, and then we'll follow with Kim and Ben.
Sure. I think that social dashboards for listening give you an immediate feel of what's being said about your company, if people are talking back at you using @mention. And social dashboards are trying to offer more analytics, although they're still pretty rudimentary. So I think for most small businesses that only are tracking or don't really need enterprise scale types of business intelligence from social media, I think dashboards are fine. But at some point you need to scale, and in order to really get all that business intelligence, I really do think you need to go above and beyond a simple dashboard for monitoring mentions and publishing.
Kim?
Yeah, I think dashboards, from just taking the marketer perspective, I think that having a very visual way to look at data and trends will help the marketers at least at that first step of analysis, right? And I would say that's probably one rudimentary step is to be able to step back and look at data in more of a visual way and be able to identify what those triggers and trends are. But I think going forward, I think as marketers get more mature around what to do with this data and how to apply it, the need for more advanced dashboards and analytics, and especially getting into predictive analytics, right, and being able to pull those types of insights into an easy way for marketers to digest. And I think that's where I think things are going to head, right, in order for marketers to really get the value out of the social data they're collecting.
And Ben?
So I think I agree with both, with Neil and Kim. I think you can't use dashboards in isolation. That's absolutely true. I think they have a really strong role to play in helping organizations understand social. What do I mean by that? So whilst we as an industry, we understand it and we kind of understand the terminology, a lot of brands and organizations don't get it yet. And why would they? It's a completely new phenomenon, and these are older traditional brands. So what I've seen, and I've seen this firsthand personally, using something like a social dashboard with your C-suite, for example, can be really powerful in acting as almost like a cultural catalyst for change. So what it helps them do is understand the conversation, understand the subtleties and nuances of social, but it doesn't obviously give the entire picture. The best way I can describe this was my former chief exec. When he first looked at a social dashboard that I built, he kind of looked and went, wow, for the first time I get an unfiltered view of what the customers are saying. We've all seen market research about our brands. We've all seen those verbatim comments. We've all seen the slides that say 90% of our customers are happy or unhappy with us. But until you see, for example, the Twitter picture plus the verbatim, it becomes much more powerful. But as I say, you cannot use it in isolation. They are great for summary views, but you need a deep-rooted analytics and insight platform to support a much richer insight program.
Yes, thank you. We have a question, Ben, this is directed more towards you from Vicki. Internal collaboration platform use has exploded, and yet there are not a lot of tools to use for internal social listening. Is this an area that social listening companies are working towards? So from your experience, Ben, it'd be helpful to explain what you've done for internal listening within IBM and what one should be looking for in a tool.
Of course. So I think in my initial response is you're absolutely right. We've, as industries, spent all of our time and money and effort investing in listening tools for external social platforms, and that's fine. What I think we have done is we've forgotten about those internal social networks, because I think, truth be told, they are not as widely adopted yet as other platforms. So let me use an example. Actually, IBM, we have our own internal social network, as I said before, 440,000 people on our internal social network. We run deep analytics, we run dashboards, and actually we run some of our cognitive computing capabilities across that unstructured text to really start to mine into the conversation. And we've run a few internal projects to really just understand what the conversation is. So the principles of internal social listening are absolutely identical to external social. It's just that the platform is different. Now, you are right, we don't see many vendors currently turning their attention to the internal ones. My prediction is we'll see much more of that in the coming year.
Yes. Kim, this question is from Vanessa. How can organizations measure the impact of social data? And what is the difference between tracking and measuring social data?
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll start with the second half of the question. Yeah, so tracking is really just that, literally just bringing in social data that could, and if we could just go back to the basics, number of posts, comments, conversations, tweets, and I would say even sentiment falls in with that, and just basically tracking the volume, right, or the quantity of that data. When we talk about measuring, it really gets down to measuring the deltas, right, based on actions that are taken by the brand or the marketer or anyone in the company for that matter, and what is the impact, right, as far as what conversations are taking place out on social, and even how the brand marketer are taking that information in, and how is that data impacting change within the organization, right? So measurement is, you really need to have that baseline, and you need to really understand that correlation between the action, right, and the results, versus just tracking data, right? And as I mentioned before, I mean, you're really not going to get a whole lot of value out of just monitoring what the activity on social channels, right? You need to really act upon it and then look at those changes. And then as far as measurement, and I think the first half of the question was more around how do you measure the impact. Again, I'll go back to my very early example around using social insights to drive change within a function in the organization. So I used two examples of taking social data, converting it into insights that will drive improvements in product, right? I did that at Sun, and actually that worked very effectively for a brand new product that we're taking to market, and understanding what our developers thought about that product and how they compare that product with our competitors, and specific features that they wanted to see in the product, and basically taking that information, coupling it with more structured data, and then using that to really drive the product roadmap, right? So I think that's one example of taking that data and pulling it into a specific function. And there's many other examples I'm sure anyone on the panel here today could talk about. But again, I think it really gets down to using it to drive action, and then also not using that data in a vacuum, using it to complement other sources of insights and data, and using it to really impact that customer journey, and how the company is responding, right, to those changes in the journey.
Thank you, Kim. This question is from Max, directed towards Neil. Where should organizations begin with measuring social media ROI?
That's a great question, and I think this really comes down to, and I talked about social media being the ultimate focus group, and where you can be using social listening data throughout the enterprise. So it really begins with understanding your business strategies, where is your business ROI, where are your business KPIs, and picking areas where social media can add to it. So when we start measuring the ROI, and Kim brought up a lot of great points, I like to say it's the infrastructure. It's the same, what's the ROI of your website? And there's still some CEOs that question that, believe it or not, even at some large companies I've had a chance to work with. So it really comes down to trying to find areas. And maybe I showed that marketing campaign slide of YoPlay with the data correlation with sales. Maybe it is, using social media to be able to generate relationships that ended up in hiring someone that you didn't need to work through an outside recruiter to hire. Maybe it is being able to reduce customer support expenses because so many of your users are on social media and tracking what you're talking about there, so that when something comes up, it's actually reducing the strain on on your telephone operator. So there are so many ways of measuring it, but it doesn't come down to social media ROI. It comes down to how social media is complementing everything else you do, or your business ROI. So think of those specific functions. And obviously, if you're doing like a social media influencer marketing campaign and you want to try to get more ROI out of that, anything that's social media specific, it's obviously a lot easier to measure. But for the other ones, it's a matter of how you're incorporating social media into everything you're already doing, and therefore how you're measuring everything you're already doing, and look for those aha moments where you can correlate what you've been doing in social with either increased income or decreased in expenses.
Thank you. This question is for the panel overall. How can we assign our traditional content marketing to our social media channels which we are using? So it sounds like it could be a little bit of publishing aspect to it as well. So how can we assign our traditional content marketing to our social media channels which we are using? Would anyone like to take on that question?
I'll take it first if you want, Todd. It's Ben. So I think in my viewpoint, from what I've seen work, just blindly trying to take existing content and push it through social platforms is really the wrong approach. So what I would strongly advocate for any content marketing team is that if nothing else, listening to the conversations going on around your brand, your products, and your services, and really start to discern those insights from that. Because as Neil said up front, this is a form of research. In fact, social is the best form of research you never actually commissioned. So you have to start with the listening piece. You have to really tap in and understand. What I've seen work really well is actually start to figure out how you can produce your content in a much more timely fashion so it resonates with the insights that you find from social. I heard a great stat not long ago that a traditional marketing campaign can take up to 3 months to get from conception through to actual execution. In social platforms, that's just not acceptable. You've got to be much more timely. So you've got to find a way of tapping into the insights, creating content which resonates with those insights, and publishing it out through the platforms. Absolutely don't take your existing content and just push it through, because chances are it probably won't resonate.
Very good. Another question here from Nicole. What is the best way to listen to social conversations without an expensive social listening tool? Well, there are free tools out there such as Google Alerts. Our own company, TalkWalker, has TalkWalker Alerts and free search capabilities where companies can actually go online and set up topics to be able to get some immediate content back based on conversations that are out there. And then there are companies that have a wide range of price ranges, from larger packages to smaller packages. So it's a matter of investigating and talking about budget requirements that you may have and then trying to match it. But there are some, when you're just starting out there are free tools that you can use just to get your toe in the water there. Ben, I have another question for you here that just came in. How do you avoid knee-jerk reactions when you see a blip in social conversation?
That's a great question. And there is always that tweet that will come in that's generally seen by someone at your board who will then go, we've got to deal with this. And I kind of liken this to you. Do you take a knee-jerk reaction? Is it a fad versus a trend? Now, this is where, in my honest belief, that we have an issue with some of the automated listening tools. And dashboards in particular falls into this particular category, because you can see something which kind of goes against all the parameters. It suddenly becomes up as an exception, and actually you need to take human intervention to really understand what's going on. So what I've done in the past is absolutely employ technology, but employ people, humans who understand the business, who understand social data, and can detect whether what we're seeing in social platforms is out of the ordinary. And very quickly, once you start to track social conversation, you know what normal conversation looks like. You know what exceptions look like. So actually employing a good marriage between technology and human is the answer to that question.
Very good. Kim, I have here, how can brands complement their community strategy with social listening?
Okay, great. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, if you think about all these conversations that are taking place about brands, I think it's absolutely key, right? The first step is to be listening, right, to those conversations, and driving individuals back to a branded destination where the company could have more in-depth conversations, provide more connections with other experts or specific content that will either help, number one, answer a question, right, that an individual may have on the brand or its offerings, and number two, if it's an individual who is not yet a customer, right, being able to provide those resources that will help them really help shape the decision. And obviously the ultimate goal is to shape this decision to buy, right? So I actually think that, if you think about community from a branded perspective, and I showed Lululemon earlier, I think social listening complements that really, really well, but only if you, again, are taking that data, basically driving insights and into the community itself, and whether that is driving using those insights to help ignite discussions. In some cases you could track, and you could actually track comments within the community itself, right? And then also use the deeper conversations that will create more user-generated content that you could then put back out on social channels, which will then drive people back to the community, right? So it's definitely an ongoing cycle. And I've seen brands that have really tapped into this very well, get multiple benefits, right? They get the insights that are going to help them basically improve their products and offerings, but they also use the social data to activate more conversations and more advocacy, which again are going to drive more individuals back to the community.
Very good. I have a question for all from Jenny, whoever wants to answer this one. Please provide 1 or 2 tips on marketing agencies to manage all the social data they are monitoring, especially when they have more than one client. So the question is, any tips when you have more than one client as a marketing agency managing all the social data they're monitoring, how to best digest everything?
Well, that's Todd. This is Neil. I'll sort of take a stab. It's a very, very difficult question because if you're a marketing agency, obviously it starts with investing in the right tool that's going to allow you to scale and be able to, optimally manage all those different accounts and find a wealth of information on behalf of your clients. But on the other hand, because a marketing agency is working on behalf of your clients, and what they see as ROI is going to be different than what you may see as ROI, they have to see the ROI of that business intelligence for you to help manage it for them anyway. But if I was a marketing agency myself, I would want to standardize on a tool internally, but I also want to standardize on what sort of information my clients would be looking for and try to offer that to all my clients so that I get the greatest efficiency in my work. But every client has, as being at a marketing agency, has very, very different needs. So in order for you as an agency to do this efficiently, you need to sort of standardize that operation. Todd, I don't know if you have anything else to offer. I know that you work with a lot of agencies as well directly.
Yeah, it's all really trying to understand what they're looking to do, how much publishing, how much engagement may be needed, and really being able to set up the right buckets and things channeling the right way. So it's a matter of planning and mapping out and doing a lot of listening and strategy at the beginning, and then it's inputting it, and everything works out really good after that. At this point, for all our listeners, we're at the point where we have to go into our closing part because we're running out of time. We have about 2 minutes left, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's been really great to hear your thoughts and questions on this increasingly important issue for all involved in social media, and I'm glad to say that we all agree that it's growing there and complementing everything. I'd also like to give a big thanks to our guests for sharing their expert insights on the topic, and I think we all got a little bit smarter today. And finally, a big thank you to Social Media Today for hosting us and making this all possible. If you missed any part of the webinar or want to watch it again, the webinar replay will be available on the talkwalker.com website and the Social Media Today website. And feel free to email me any additional questions at t.grossman@talkwalker.com or Social Media Today. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day and evening.